Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. This is my review of Final Fantasy XIV 7.0 Dawntrail. This does not include post-launch content. We're talking just about the changes in 7.0. What are those? Well, new story, new areas, 2 new jobs, and of course, the graphical overhaul. Let's start with the positives, or the mostly positives. The graphical overhaul, for one thing. Whilst to some eyes it might not be immediately apparent unless you have a side-by-side, the graphical overhaul has made a lot of smaller and nuanced updates too, that nonetheless make for a much improved experience in Final Fantasy XIV. The biggest, most important change for me is how the game now handles aliasing. From A Realm Reborn until just a few weeks ago, Final Fantasy XIV had absolutely horrible aliasing that I suffered for near a decade just because there was no way to mitigate it. Trees, for example, would shimmer and appear overly sharp and aliased, which was especially egregious in some areas. Now we have AMD's FSR, Nvidia's DLSS, and other more modern anti-aliasing / resolution scalers, which present a much better image. Some will argue the image can be too soft or blurry now, but I'd frankly take soft trees over ones that physically stab my eyeballs. There's some other really nice improvements too. Material rendering, that is to say, metal is now reflective and shiny. Or to put it another way, you can tell the difference between leather, metal, brick, and velvet. These materials now all reflect or absorb and handle light in much more realistic ways, which adds a lot more depth to the world. There's loads of other changes too. Many textures have been overhauled, characters have been updated, lighting's been improved, and so on. Overall, the only negatives I have to say about the graphical overhaul is that it's inconsistent. Some things have been updated, others are still waiting their turn and will come later, which at the moment gives the game a bit of an uneven look at times. That, and performance issues have been cropping up for some players. I have been thankfully unaffected by those, but they are out there. The worst I experienced was, I believe, shadow cascading on its new maximum setting. I had a strange flickering effect on a waterfall in the distance. Turning down the setting fixed it. One more nice thing about the graphical update, the game now has a frame rate cap that functions far better than it did before. The old cap in-game was awful, just gave the game a stuttery, unevenly paced feeling. That said, Nvidia's built-in frame rate cap is probably still better. Semi-related, I suppose, to the graphical update is the 2-die system, which is pretty nice for the items that have it, and when the second die isn't like 1 pixel, but overall it's a really nice change, and well, now we just need more glamour plates and glamour storage, or just a better glamour system in general. The other nice change? Gameplay. Aspects of it, that is to say. Dungeons and encounters. Perhaps around the time of Stormblood, or an answer to Stormblood, the difficulty level in Final Fantasy XIV was cut drastically. People complained that Thunder God Cid was too hard, and the culmination of that was, I suppose, Endwalker, which had, especially in the Alliance raid for example, brain dead difficulty. Now, I don't play Final Fantasy XIV for the challenge or the difficulty, but I also don't really like to play a game where I don't even really need to focus on what's going on. I can just look at another screen or my phone whilst pressing 1 and pretty much clear it easily. 14 had a strange divide where there was no middle content. There was casual and hardcore with nothing in between. In my opinion, Alliance raids should provide a big part of that middle core experience. So far, the dungeons in Dawntrail have felt as if they may be returning a bit of difficulty and intensity to the experience. We'll have to see how it goes from here, but the expert dungeons are off to an interesting start. I have big hopes for the Final Fantasy XI Alliance Raid series, but the dungeons in general were enjoyable, and the new gameplay changes, well, those were a bit more mixed. I like how Dragoon plays now. That was my starting job in 14, and it's one that I've wrestled with throughout the many years I've played the game. I hated so many aspects of it. Life of the Dragon, needing to keep that up, it just didn't feel good. The jumps didn't feel good. It feels better now, but it has inherited a lot of jank, and it still doesn't fulfill the class fantasy of a Dragoon for me. Unless we're talking PvP, where you can actually have a jump. But comically, most jobs realise their class fantasy far better in PvP than they do in PvE. It's a shame that PvP in this game is awful and full of bad netcode, bad crowd control spam, and just bad map design. But that's a different topic. Paladin was rendered unplayable for me years ago thanks to Atonement. I hated the animation for that ability so much. Forcing me to do it 3 times in a row killed Paladin for me. Petty? Maybe. But if I'm looking at an animation thousands of times, I want it to be a good animation. Now Atonement has its own combo string, so that solved that problem. Scholar, my old healer of choice back in the day, has been instead rendered unplayable by forcing your character's appearance into some sort of weird angel dress thing that, sure, it might look okay on a Lalafell or an Aura female, but for a lot of races and stuff, it just looks stupid. Until they bring in a way to toggle that off or change it in some way, again, Scholar is unplayable for me. I didn't mind it so much with Reaper, because it was there from day one of Reaper. I knew it was there. Scholar, I've been playing for years, and now it's gone from, battlefield tactician sort of healer, having an alternative to White Mage, which was the, yay, unicorns and angel wings sort of healer. This one felt like it was meant to be more of a tactician, but lately they've been really leaning into the just fairies aspect of it, which just isn't for me personally. But on the bright side, I have Sage, so if I want to heal, I can just play Sage. As for Viper and Pictomancer, I'll admit, neither job appeals to me that much. I don't like the aesthetic of Pictomancer. I'm trying them out and I'm leveling them up, of course, but I can't offer too many opinions on them so far. Pictomancer feels very just press the buttons that light up and stuff. It feels easy. I'm sure I'm missing the nuances of it though. And I really like their movement because it's like, oh, if a boss is doing its spam AoEs thing, I can just run around and spam all my holies that I saved up. Is that the ideal way to play Pictomancer? Probably not, but it feels good. Viper, again, I have no idea how to play. I'm just pressing whatever button lights up. Sometimes I start spamming abilities like going Super Saiyan Blue, I don't know. I imagine both will be popular, especially Viper, as, it's the, 2 swords type of class, and for some reason, beyond my personal comprehension, a lot of people just are obsessed with 2 sword jobs and classes and games. The new zones are the last thing I have to praise in Dawntrail. Most of them are nice to look at, and I feel as if they went the extra mile when it came to environmental detail, perhaps due to the updated engine. That also brings me onto my biggest negative about Dawntrail, the story. Final Fantasy XIV is a game I would say I play primarily for the story, and Dawntrail's story, for me, is the worst it's ever been, including A Realm Reborn. Can't talk about 1.0 because I wasn't playing during 1.0 because my computer couldn't handle the game back then. I could honestly make an entire video, or some will say nitpicking the story, for probably like an hour. But I'll try and keep it down to 2 main areas of frustration: bad writing and mismanaged expectations. There's also the gameplay side of the story, because maybe it's just me, but I feel as if Dawntrail's story is nothing but go to NPC, talk to NPC, with, a dungeon every 3 levels or so. But maybe it's just the fact that they're trying to carry this story with nothing but dialogue, and the dialogue and the story just isn't working for me this time. But yes, for the mismanaged expectations, I'll touch on the latter first, as that's easy to explain. The advertising and lead up to Dawntrail gave me a very different impression of what the game was going to be. See, I feel as if my expectations for Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker were pretty on point with what actually was delivered. I don't know about Heaven's Ward, as I didn't see any of the advertising up to release for that. But this also isn't an objective flaw of the game, it's my expectations. But that said, the advertising, the trailers, the live letters, everything, I believe it's quite different to what was delivered. This leads nicely into my other complaint. Take the game's intro cinematic or trailer, for example. You know who's in that for a few seconds at the very end of it? Wuk Lamat. You know who is in almost every single scene of the game? Wuk Lamat. The game's trailer gave me the impression that some, Obviously not all of the expansion would be the Scion's vacation, exploring a new land. Instead, I got a game story that was the Wuk Lamat show. Final Fantasy XIV has never hyper-focused on a single character to the extent that Dawntrail focuses on Wuk Lamat. At first, I quite enjoyed her character. By the end of the expansion, I loathed her, not even because of her character, but just from the sheer amount of exposure and screen time she had, showing up every single scene. I groaned out loud when she showed up during the final boss fight. I like ice cream. If you force feed me ice cream all day, I'm gonna hate ice cream. Here's the thing, Wuk Lamat, and arguably no character in 14 is strong enough to carry an entire narrative of, 20 to 40 hours. Wuk Lamat is a very shallow character. I saw some statistics that suggested she has 43% more dialogue than all of the Scions combined. That's just too much. Now, I'd love to see this for the other expansions just to see how they hold up, because I feel as if no one has ever had that much focus. Could be wrong, but that's what feels to me. This leads me into the poor writing part. The themes of Dawntrail feel at odds with themselves. We spend the entire first half experiencing other cultures in a very superficial way, like, we were at war, but then we had a taco together. Now we like each other. Smiles, we can be friends. It's very shallow, and it boils down cultures to, like, one very superficial element. It would be like saying England's culture is tea, America's culture is gun, India's culture is curry. You know, they're boiling down cultures to very superficial surface elements, which feels stupid. Isn't it great we all like food? We can work together and have peace. Never mind the fact there's already peace because of what the older generation achieved. We're really just experiencing it from Wuk Lamat's perspective, as she's lived here her whole life, but actually she's just a sheltered city girl. And now she's going to another culture and she's like, I've been in your culture for 5 minutes, now I understand it completely. Then in the second half of the game, after we've, had all this, we should all work together, harmonious, yay! We then encounter a culture that isn't directly compatible with ours, and we almost immediately make the decision to genocide it. What? You can put aside the ethical part of it, like, oh, well, it's okay because they're not really alive. Yeah, look at me sounding like Emmet Selk. Well, I won't be guilty of genocide because you're not really alive. Now we're Emmet Selk. Isn't that a great route to be taking? Now, maybe this is me coming from the perspective of someone who has watched Star Trek, where a big part of The Next Generation involves dealing with incompatible cultures and how you arrive at a compromise. But this whole theme in Dawntrail was, frankly, laughable to me. It felt like something a 10-year-old who's never left their hometown wrote. They're like, other cultures are good, we should be friends with them. This culture is bad though, we will kill them all. The theme of Dawntrail is apparently it's good to get along with other cultures, unless they have anything that inconveniences you. Basically, if you can't overcome your differences by clenching your fist or eating food, well, you should immediately slaughter them. There's, I suppose, 3 antagonists in Dawntrail. The main one, that is to say the one who represents the antagonist for the longest amount of time, is both severely underdeveloped and has no clear goal as a villain. I kept waiting for his reasoning or backstory for why he's doing all this, but it never came. His motivations are largely nonsensical, and they exist to make Wuk Lamat seem like a better person and a better character. That's another thing. Wuk Lamat is on the verge of being a Mary Sue, in the sense that almost every single character who encounters her immediately takes her side and thinks she's great. And I'm using the more traditional original meaning of a Mary Sue, which is, if you're unaware, Mary Sue was a character inserted into, I think, Star Trek as like, oh, I'm Kirk's long-lost sister or something, who everyone immediately loves and respects them. It's not about a character being super powerful, because Wuk Lamat isn't more powerful than the Warrior of Light. That's not the perspective I'm coming from. Even if she were, that would be stupid, but I wouldn't really care that much. I'm fine with things being more powerful than the Warrior of Light, if it makes sense for it to be so. No, Wuk Lamat's Mary Sue-ness comes from the fact that everyone loves her. She is the goal of basically everyone in the expansion. Even most of the villains respect her, even if they have no reason to. It's the Wuk Lamat show, when really she's affable enough, but there isn't that much to respect about her. Take Emet-Selch and Xenos. I don't like Emet-Selch, but I understand his goals as a villain, and to some extent I can empathize with them, even if I don't agree with them. Xenos. I like Xenos as a villain, although I don't agree with his goals, and I don't empathize with him because, weirdly enough, I'm not like a super strong sociopath who is like so powerful that the rest of humanity are basically ants to me. Because that's basically Xenos' story. Everyone from his perspective was like an ant, then he met another human. Wuk Lamat though, she never encounters any shortcomings or legitimate problems. If she does encounter a hurdle, she overcomes it almost immediately, often in an unrealistic way. She just powers up through friendship, or blithely ignoring realistic problems, or glossing over them with platitudes such as, if we can be friends and work together and eat food, we can become the united and do the things that we want to do and make the place a good place. Peace is good, war is bad. Again, she can work if she was there perhaps for 1/10 of the screen time she has. Meanwhile, the other Scions barely have anything to do. Sure, this might make sense for some of them as they've had a lot of focus in other expansions, but this expansion surely should have been Krill's time to shine. And yet Krill gets like one scene in the last area, which feels like it was just they forgot about her and they're like, oh right, we need to do something with Krill because this is meant to be, you know, her story time. Overall, I was incredibly disappointed with the story. I could go on and on about it, but I've covered the main points. I don't need to further dissect it, like, oh, how stupid it was. Instead of the new world binding together and coming up with some sort of solution for their problem, they literally just called in help from across the sea and decided to not lose. They decided to do better fighting. I don't need to mention how the Warrior of Light could have, you know, just teleported back to Eorzea, jumped in his literal Gundam, and used that to take care of the looming threat. Or how there are slightly ad-odd themes with what constitutes being alive in Final Fantasy XIV, and now we are the ones who get to arbitrarily decide that. 10,000 other issues and nitpicks, because this video is long enough. So, is Dawntrail worth playing if you stopped playing after Endwalker? Not really. If you're the sort of player who plays regardless, then you won't care what I say because there's going to be things for you to enjoy. And if you do play for things other than the story, there are some good things in Dawntrail going on. But if you finished Endwalker and you're wondering, oh, should I, resubscribe and, play through the new story? No, you shouldn't. If this is the start of a new 10-year journey, it's off to a really disappointing start. Of course, it's possible things will improve. Again, I did think that during the whole Zero Golbez stuff, which was awful as well. But maybe this is just a low point and we're gonna get better. But I don't know. For me, this has ruined the streak that we had going from A Realm Reborn all the way through Endwalker. And yes, Realm Reborn had a lot of rough parts in the story, but overall it was telling an interesting story, just it was telling it in a kind of weird way. Dawntrail told a pretty boring story in a very bad way. But let's see what the side content of Dawntrail has for us going forward. But what did you think? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.